name's Randy Gavin, and I'm a former Mormon. And I think when I left the Mormon Church, it was not maybe as prominent as today, and I felt somewhat like a rock star. You know, people made a deal, but at some point, it wasn't too long before I realized that I had really come out of something that was very different than something real admirable. And I'd like to just make this analogy. In October the 3rd of 2011, I was diagnosed with lymphoma. And the thing about that is I was already a Christian, and so I thought, I get to go home. So I was pretty excited. My wife, she says, what am I, chopped liver? So I, okay, I'll cooperate. So we did the chemo, and I'm in remission, and I'm feeling great, and doing well. And I'm thankful the Lord's given me this time, and I figure that He's given it to me to do something. So try to take every opportunity, and we always have. I mean, since coming out, if somebody is being taught the missionary lessons, and a Christian knows about the Mormons in the area teaching lessons, they usually have called us, and we've gone over and sat in just to make sure the Mormons tell all the stuff they really should tell, so that people have full disclosure. They can, from an informed position, make an informed decision. So that's always been important to us, and we've always been very upfront and told who we were in the missionary lessons with people. And we've had some very, very interesting experiences. Anyway, the analogy that I'd like to make is this. The cancer didn't hurt. It broke my back. That kind of hurt. But I'd noticed it. I thought, well, boy, my top of my back is disconnected from my lower back. I don't know what's going on there. It just feels weird. But it had actually taken one of my vertebrae and just crushed it. I asked the surgeon, what was it like when you went in there? What's cancer look like? What's it like? What's it feel like? Because I figured she had hands-on experience. She said it was like a hockey puck, very smooth, very hard. And one of the things that I've learned about cancer, and there may be people here who know a whole lot more than I do, but one of the things I've learned is that cancer takes advantage of the processes of my body. So stuff I've got going on that makes me live and breathe and move, that God ordained, cancer, when it gets going, it is using all those processes. They've developed over a long period of time something called angiogenesis, which goes in and tries to short circuit the use by the cancer of your body processes. It tries to dry up the vessel, the blood vessels that have to supply cancer. When it grows, it has to flourish and be nourished, and so they develop things to try and cut that off. So the analogy is, as a Mormon, everything, as far as I knew, does a fish know it's wet? Everything was, Jesus wants me for a sunbeam to shine for Him each day. Give said the little stream, give said for Jesus gives. It is all about Jesus. I got baptized at the age of 8 after memorizing the 13 Articles of Faith. That was the key. You get baptized if you memorize those at the age of 8. I did, and I got confirmed a member of the church. I was baptized into the church, and I was confirmed a member of the church, given the gift of the Holy Ghost under the Mormon priesthood. When I was 9 years old, my sister, just a little older than me, we always had a little bit of a competitive edge going, she got her patriarchal blessing. I went to the bishop and said, I should have one of those too. And after talking for a while, and he figured, I guess this kid's okay. So I got my patriarchal blessing in the East Mesa Stake in Arizona. And I could tell you what they said, but point is, I was fully involved in the church, and even as a little kid, I think I had this bent toward religion. So I'm doing it. I'm doing all the stuff they're supposed to do. That same year, at 9 years of age, we went to the temple. The Sunday school teachers and the primary teachers gathered us up, and maybe 20 or so of us went and got baptized for the dead in the Mesa Temple. So a big, huge basin, with the oxen underneath it, and we're making this circle, just keep going. The first time was kind of cool because you're looking at all the oxen and everything's exciting, but then when you come up out of the water, then you got this big heavy jumpsuit on, white jumpsuit, and you're standing there waiting for everybody else, and it's cold, it's kind of in the basement temple, or in the temple of the basement of the temple. And I remember that part vividly. That afternoon, I was out playing just like all the rest of the kids in the neighborhood after performing ordinances for the dead. Kind of interesting. Then, age 12, ordained a deacon, moved from being a guide scout to a full-blown Boy Scout, became an Eagle Scout, passed the sacrament, became the teacher at age 14, Eagle Scout after that, and then an Explorer Scout, and just doing all the activities. I remember thinking somewhere late in high school that I, as a teenager, didn't really have time to sit down and really think because I was so busy. School, the time that school takes, and all the activities, dance festivals, road shows, plays, and just the normal weekly activities. It was just pretty amazing nonstop activity, and I was happy. I was very happy with it. Then you reach the age of 18, well, it's time for something else to happen. Missionary preparation class. This photo here, that's me, punk. And I get up to I go through my missionary preparation class, and then having done that, it's time to go to the temple, or at least waiting to go to the temple. The call comes from the prophet. It was Spencer W. Kimball in this case. No, pardon me, it was David O. McKay, and he died right around that time. Anyway, then Spencer W. Kimball. So I get this call, and it says you're going to call to the Cumorah mission, and Cumorah sounds like somewhere near Samoa, where my friend Charlie had just been called to. But it was upstate New York. And so when I heard New York, I'm going, okay, asphalt, I'm going to be playing basketball with a lot of black people, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So I get out there, and it's upstate New York, it's green, it's farmland, it's, in most cases very rural and beautiful. While I was on the mission, I just maybe hit some incidents that happened. One would be that I was called to serve over in the Cairo area, which is Catskill on the Hudson River, and then from there, district leader over closer to Rochester. And I noticed one day at church at the Rochester ward, the bishop and the elders quorum president were arguing vehemently, a very heated exchange between them. And the gist of it that I could catch was the discussion about the priesthood and the inability of a certain race to hold it, and don't talk about it here, like it's a subject for somewhere else. I don't know where, but anyway, there was that incident, and I thought, I never heard of that. And growing up in Mesa, I just never did, never heard of it for some reason. That there was a prohibition to the priesthood. So my next experience with that was over in Buffalo, in this beautiful family with 7 boys had been baptized into the church the year before. And they had began their progression in the church, doing the things that you do to become active and fully invested Mormons, which included genealogy. And their line, their attention that they had one relative back there that was of the black race. And so this family of boys and the father were told not to use their priesthood. They still had it, but you can't use it. So every position and leadership and every ability they had in the church at that time was withdrawn from them. They could participate as members. I found this very strange and didn't know what to think of it. I was in the gospel doctrine class, and this family was obediently submitting to that. They hadn't left. The gospel doctrine teacher made the comment that the brethren back in Salt Lake are talking this thing over pretty seriously, and some of them feel that the time has come. And all of a sudden, from the folding doors at the back of the chapel that go into the rec hall, the stake president, Vincent, a research doctor over at Roswell Cancer Institute, he comes out and he says, "Are you saying there's dissension among the quorum of the 12?" And the teacher was probably as nervous as I am right now. And he stuttered, stumbled, and then said, "Well, I was back in Salt Lake, and this is what people that I know there, that know those people are saying." Well, they escorted him out of the church at that right then and there. I have been amazed as I have thought back of the justification, the mental gymnastics that I went through in order to make the Mormon Church the only true church on the face of the earth. And that was one of those moments. And I won't go into detail because it was pretty stupid and embarrassing. But that's baggage. That's stuff that you're carrying. And I believe it's the stuff that Jesus talked about when he said you put heavy burdens on the people's backs. You won't let them enter the kingdom, and you're not going in. We carried a lot of baggage as Mormons. We had a lot of answers, Well, only 1 or 2% of the church ever practiced polygamy. We had all these answers. Well, there's a lot more women in the West than men. Yeah, right. 7 brides for 7 brothers ordered from somewhere, right? Pretty silly. And that's what I was saying earlier. I felt like a rock star. People made a big deal. It was over at Southeast Christian Church on Vine Street. Anybody know that one? It was a nice church, really nice church. The head elder there, Dwayne Leslie, is the one that mentored us in the faith. It was a wonderful experience. Great people. But the truth was that I was from something really, this thing that was using the process of the processes of the Christian faith. Was using it. And the interesting thing about cancer is that, like I said, my cancer didn't hurt. But also, as it's using the process and it's not hurting, and you're just going along with your life thinking everything's okay, at some point, it's destroying your ability to function in those processes. Well, let me put it this way. Did anybody assign you to come here this evening? Who was assigned to come? Anybody? Okay, I had assignments in the church, home teachings. Matter of fact, that's one thing I forgot to mention. Growing up, I was, one of my home teaching partners was a guy named Marco Dutson. Great guy, lived around the corner from us in Mesa. And just a really wonderful young man, elders quorum, beautiful family. And I'm sitting in state conference one time, and my home teaching partner's name is called out. And I go, oh, and as a kid, I probably wasn't listening to anything else, but I heard his name. And he was being excommunicated for the other family he had on the outside of town, down on Baseline Road. Polygamist, okay? Wonderful man, okay? But eventually that process is a killer, or gets killed. The cancer kills the process of what God's purpose for us is, which is to develop in us the character of Christ. I got another home teaching partner, and his name was Gene Cook. Well, Gene took our home teaching program from a 44% fulfillment, and he just graduated from ASU and got his English degree and Master of Business Administration, and went to work for his father, Metropolitan Life Insurance, and $1 million round table right off the bat. $1 million was a lot of money back then. And he's my partner, and I felt privileged. Gene, we did so well, not me, but Gene just had this way with people. And he did so well that the leaders of the ward, the bishop, asked him to head up the home teaching program, which he did. And he took us into the high 80s. Everybody going out and doing their job and psyched up. And the truth is, people are being reached. People are being tended to, along with the main purpose of the home teaching, which is you still sustain the profit of the church and the leaders, every month. Yeah, I do still. But other good things happening, but not enough to justify an assignment to go and love thy neighbor as thyself. It needs to come from the heart of God to our hearts. So the process. Gene got called, no longer was my home teaching partner, because again, I hear his name in conference. He has been called up to Salt Lake City to teach the brethren business etiquette. I thought, well, that's interesting. I wonder what that's about. My seminary teacher, Jay Jensen, Gene Cook eventually got into the First Quorum of 70. Jay Jensen also is still in the First Quorum of 70, and I couldn't find Gene's name recently when I looked, so I don't know what's happened. Two very congenial, young, wonderful family men, wonderful people to know. The next time I saw them, I had years past. I'd moved up to Salt Lake and had my own beautiful family, and I came across Gene and Jay at the General Conference, and I won't pass judgment on them, but they were not the happy men that I knew. Maybe there was some horrible thing that they just experienced or something, but they were very different people. Let me go back to my mission. I had, go ahead and put the other picture of Marion D. Hanks, or no, I guess I can do it. There we go. This fellow here. You might mention another baptism. Yes. I was given leadership positions, district leader, then a zone leader, and the reason was because I worked hard. It wasn't because I baptized anybody into the Mormon church. I had baptized nobody, even at the year mark. It's only a 2-year mission, so it was looking pretty grim for me. But a couple of things that happened. One was the mission president when I first went out was a guy named Reed Bankhead. He was a BYU professor of Book of Mormon theology. Okay, and very serious-minded man, very serious-minded. He had strict requirements. We had to memorize hundreds of Book of Mormon scriptures, and he kept us immersed in the Book of Mormon just continually. Then his time, he was toward the end of his mission when I went out, and another fellow came, Bob Stevenson. Bob Stevenson owned a water softening company and was a principal in a motorhome company, Ute, I think was the name of the company. And he had a whole different approach. He was the consummate salesman, excellent. And so he said, you know what we got to do here? We've got to do more New Testament scriptures as a common ground with those that we're going to teach. So all of a sudden, we're switched. Now, as a Book of Mormon scriptures, because the Book of Mormon does speak so much about Christ, I was concerned that maybe my testimony of God wasn't as good as it should be. So I began praying, God, give me the one that's the zinger. And so I was looking for a sign, that God was going to give me that, boy, I'll be the greatest missionary there is. And I had an experience, kind of like Joseph Smith describes in his Sacred Grove. This really ugly thing rears its head, and you don't want any more of it. And I quit praying for a while. And then a while later, after the new mission president, he's got us reading the New Testament, and so I'm reading, and I see a wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. And I, at that point, honestly believed that I was convicted of sin, because it wasn't a specific sin. I was convicted that I was a sinner. Okay? I'm still a Mormon, right? And so I began praying again, devoutly, only this time I was asking God for the remedy for my sin. And it wasn't a feeling, but God showed me the remedy, Jesus Christ, in the person of Jesus Christ, the only way. And so I took great delight in going out and telling people that, because I now had the zinger. Only problem is I could get no one into the water. Nobody wanted to be baptized as a Mormon because Jesus Christ is the real divine Son of God. And I found that interesting. So this guy, Marion D. Hanks, of the First Council of 70 at that time, he comes out to our mission to interview all the missionaries, which they do yearly. Everybody gets interviewed by a general authority. So I go in, and he says, I see you're putting in the hours, working hard, but you're not baptizing anybody. He says, what do you testify of? And I says, well, I testify of Jesus Christ. And he said, He says, well, listen, if you'll testify of Joseph Smith, I promise you in the name of the Lord, you will baptize people. Wow. And I said, I love the church, but I don't know about Joseph Smith like I know about Jesus. And he, again, affirmed to me that if I would do that, I would baptize people. Okay? Now,
what did he say about your prayer?
I don't want to tell that part. He looked at me and he says, Elder, you're proud. You're too proud. Well, anyway, shortly after that, my father sent me a book called The Challenge by Alvin R. Dyer. That book, well, they made me a zone leader. That book utilizes challenging, well, listen, Sister Brown, I will be at the baptismal font at the ward next Thursday night at 7 o'clock, waiting for you. Okay, challenge.
He told you to say something that wasn't right. Dyer did not.
Well, he told me to say very specifically that I knew, beyond a shadow of doubt, that Joseph Smith was a prophet. I get what you mean. And that if I went and told people that I knew that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God, that I would come to know that Joseph Smith was a prophet of God. Reminds me, well, no analogies. Okay, so I had this struggle within myself, and it was coming up on a zone conference, a lot of pressure for the numbers, and the zone that I was over was a stinker. I mean, they were, everybody was kind of like me, not as bad as me, but kind of. And by the way, I was known as Mr. Letter of the Law. The rules were the rules. I would go on what I called search and destroy missions, and that means I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, travel from Schenectady, New York, to Utica, just to see if the guys were up on time. Drop in, knock on their door. So I took it seriously. I developed a point system, because the zone stunk so bad. I developed a point system that was designed to give them incentives, if they kept this rule, worked this hard, did all these things. And this was the consequence. I lost that battle with integrity. I went ahead and started testifying of Joseph Smith. I became the top baptizer in the mission. Okay? My zone became the top zone in the mission. Now, this fellow here Larry Jepson, wonderful guy. I love Larry, and I hope through this he contacts me. Anyway, Larry's father passed away, and so I was by myself. Nope, I'm going to. I've jumped ahead. Okay, Larry and I are walking along a country road above Schenectady, up above Glenville and Scotia. Beautiful, pristine neighborhood out among the pine trees, and no papers anywhere. And there's a little tri-folded piece of paper. See, one sheet of paper, folded in three, and it said, "Did you know that Brigham Young taught that Adam was God?" Now, that was another thing I had never, ever heard of in my tenure in the church. Okay. Now, Larry, he's from Logan, Utah area, and I says, "You ever heard of that?" And he says, "Oh, that's apostate stuff. Throw that back down, Mount it up, throw it back down." Well, my parents taught me not to litter, and there was nothing else on the ground, and I just thought, I can't. So I stuck it in my coat pocket and forgot about it. I wasn't interested in it, apostate stuff. I would not have anything to do with apostate stuff. So Larry's father passed away a short time later, and he had to go home to his family for a bit. I was by myself, so I would wait at the church, and a member would come, and they'd go with me to the meetings that we had set up. Well, I'm at the Stake Center in Scotia, New York, on a Saturday morning. Brother Woods, our barber and the custodian of the building, is there, and I'm waiting for the guy, and he's a little late, so I'm bored. And I reach into my pocket, and holy cow, oh yeah, that thing. And I asked him, I says, "What's the Journal of Discourses?" Another thing that had escaped my attention. And he pointed behind me, and there was a glass case and a beautiful set of books. And I went over to it, and I said, "It's locked." And he threw me the key. So I sat down then, and I looked up the references that this individual had put, and they were all accurate. And I'm going, he is our God and the only God with whom we have to do? And I'm thinking, okay, 1800s, kind of flowery language. He's just trying to say that Adam was the God because of our flesh. That's it. God because of our flesh. 1800s flowery language, so I put it aside. That was it, gone. And I went on my merry way. I went home, married her. Her and her family had been baptized in 1970.
There's the two missionaries.
Yeah, Scott Roberts and Guillermo Anguiano, both precious souls that God wants to save. We got married, and we have children, evidence, grandchildren.
That's the Mesa Temple.
Yeah, Mesa, Arizona Temple. So,
What year was this?
1970.
1970, that her family got baptized by these fellows.
In 1972.
And I met her like 2 months, 3 months,
I was baptized.
3 months, and then I was I guess the month after that, I was heading home to Mesa, Arizona, and I was walking around saying to everybody, "Hey, if you're ever in Mesa, you got a place to stay," which is what I did out in New York just before we moved here. Hey, if you're ever in Utah, you got a place to stay. So her and her family came by, and anyway, things clicked, and we got married. So 10 years later from the time that a little piece of paper blew across the road informing me that Brigham Young taught that Adam was God, by then we were living in Salt Lake City, the Salt Lake Stake, the oldest existing stake in the church, and I was a stake mission president, which meant I was one of the 7 presidents of the 70 in the stake at the local level, and I ran the mission. We had our missionary meetings, 5:30 every Sunday morning. We had 6 sets of full-times. We had 24 stake missionaries and 50 or 60 70s. And so we'd meet, give them their assignments, and send them out every Sunday.
Randy, could you explain a little bit about that? Because
Sure.
didn't a 70 then mean something different than it did now, and a stake president means something differently then than it does now? For those who are watching now,
okay. All right.
Today, what you just said probably doesn't make sense.
Well, okay. The 7 presidents are over the stake mission, okay? But there's a senior president, senior 7 president, and that was me. I'd come to that position. Well, then did I explain that well enough?
Well, they don't have it anymore either.
Yeah, well, that's something I don't know for sure. That's true?
I've been told that it's very different now, stake
Yeah, but
mission presidents.
we left pretty. I mean, that was before.
What year was
After.
this? Right, or roughly?
This would be 1983.
83 or
80,
82.
probably 80.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no problem. Anyway, a friend of mine, Randy, he was a landscaper, and he was always had the headphones on and listening to the radio. He was in the elders quorum presidency in my ward, and his wife was like my wife's best friend. And Randy comes to me because I'm the stake mission president or senior 70s president, and he says to me, "There's a guy on the radio, and he's challenging the Mormons, and you should know about this." And so I said, "Well, what's he saying?" "Well, he's saying that Brigham Young taught that Adam was God. And not only that, he'll give $1,000 if anyone can prove that he didn't say it." So I thought to myself about that. Yeah, you know what? I dealt with this before. Let's do it. Let's take this guy's money and shut him up. So we divided up the work. We divided up the work. He had a Journal of Discourses in his home. Beautiful set of bound volumes sitting on the shelf. And what happened next made me know that he'd never opened them before. Because within 2 days, he called me and he says, I'm out of it. I'm not going to deal with it. I'm not doing it.
It scared him.
Yeah, it scared him. So now for me, my job was to go to the church and get something current and up to date, from the brethren. And I think because there was stuff going on right then, I think the church was well aware of this. There was stuff buzzing out there. And so they went ahead and came out with a statement. And Spencer Kimball, the prophet at that time, went ahead and made a flat-out statement in the church news and said, Brigham Young never taught that Adam was God. Never. Okay? So I realized I couldn't collect my $1,000 based on that. So I continued to dig. And what I found was things that I still could try to ignore like I had 10 years earlier. But it was all over when I went to the basement of the old Salt Lake City Library, which was the new Salt Lake City Library back then, and they had all the Deseret Newses and that were Brigham Young's articles corrected for publication, and it was there. But I was troubled, but nothing like that was enough for me to question the church very far at all. So there came a time when, well, no, I want to show that. No, it's not that. There came a time when I, in this process, I visited with my neighbor across the street, a fellow named Alan Roberts. He was a high councilman in our stake. He was an editor, off and on, of the Sunstone magazine, which I knew very little about. And I said, Alan, I'm working on shutting this guy up. John Henry Yont out of San Diego, a pastor down there and former Mormon, is challenging the church. And I'm going to shut him up. And Alan says to me, Randy, there's something I think you ought to see. And so he goes and gets me a letter. Now this letter has do not reproduce, stamped on all 9 pages. Church, LDS church letterhead, okay? Do not reproduce. And it is addressed to Mr. Eugene England, who's in the honors program. He is a professor at Brigham Young University. And in this letter, Bruce McConkie admits to Mr. England that, yes, Brigham Young did teach that Adam was God and all the other things the cultists ascribed to him. Now, he wasn't addressing anti-Mormons per se. He was addressing the fundamentalists, because Mr. England was going around the Utah Valley giving firesides, laying out the idea that was taught early in the Mormon church, that God is still growing and progressing in knowledge. And so McConkie makes a very good case that, oh, so is he going to find out tomorrow that salvation isn't quite right and he's going to change the system? And so he comes up with this statement. It's actually a pretty good defense of the omniscience of God until he says, our God has graduated. So anyway, I read this letter, and I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to take it as the final word, because if I did, what this meant is that I had just caught the prophet in a lie. There are lots of other people that obviously knew, because this letter, which Eugene England tucked into his drawer in his bishopric office, as I understand it, had been somebody else, one of his counselors saw it and said, oh, wow, I got to make a copy of that. And then somebody else, and it's out there. And then the Tanners eventually published it. But I can truthfully say it was an answer to prayer, because I was in torment about it. I was.
But you didn't
What's
take the letter.
the truth?
You went and interviewed.
I went to the McConkie family and asked them if it was real. I didn't dare approach Bruce. And I went to the England family and asked them. So it took that for me to say, okay, that letter's real. And then it was time to weep. I've been lied to. I've been treated like a peon. I center my life around the church, and this is the way they're going to treat me. I took all the seminaries and institutes. They're going to treat me like this? So I'm as arrogant. But I was mad. I was really ticked off. And but in my position in the stake, I had to show up at meetings, which I did. I did my thing. Had a couple of weird experiences. One was this guy shows up. He's all dressed in white. It's like 5:30 in the morning. Well, no, it's like 6:30, because after the meeting, we all come out of the meeting and milling around in the foyer, and this guy just makes a beeline to me. He's all dressed in white, and he comes to me and he says, there's a blessing waiting for you in connection with your dead ancestors in the temple. And I just like, holy cow, what is that about? And that greatly, because of the McConkie letter and everything that I've been looking at, it greatly increased the desire in me not to ever go back to the temple again. So I was growing disaffected in my heart, but I wasn't growing toward God. I was growing like, okay, all right, if you can put this kind of fraud over in a couple of 100 years, what can you do in 2,000 years? What's this mean about the Bible? And because, I think because of what God had shown me earlier as a young man, I was all the more in jeopardy of becoming a jaded unbeliever, and I think that happens to a lot of them. But
you did preach Christ, and that's what got you.
Yeah, I did what I could, and I told my poor missionaries, they were confused. I told them that, I think, because we live in this stake where Temple Square is in our district, I interviewed people. If they came through Temple Square and wanted to take the lessons and be baptized, I interviewed them for baptism. Because of the nature of this, and we send people back to Ohio and to Florida and wherever, and the church may or may not be strong where they go. We need to give them God. We need to preach Christ. And I think we need to back away from, talking about prophets, Joseph Smith, etc. Preach Christ more. So I did say that. And for my trouble, I got called into the stake president's office. Tell them Dave Martin sent you. It was Dave Martin Sr. And he said, Randy, it's been reported to me that you're saying this. And I said, well, yeah, and I told him the thing, my idea was, we're sending people all over the world and they need God rather than, to hear about a man. And he says, Randy, this is the gospel of the restoration. We preach Joseph Smith. So that happened. And then it happened one more time. I kept doing it, and he called me in again. And then he was very nice, very kind man, and he put his arm, his shoulder, his arm around me, and he says, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to reorganize your mission, and I'm going to give you a couple of counselors, and these are old war horses in the church, and so if you have any questions, just lean on them. And it was a guy named Paul Royal, who had always been forever with the church historian's office, and then a really nice kind man named David Fisher. And both these guys were great to work with. And because I kept talking about Jesus and that, then the stake president, he doesn't know what to do with me. And so he puts me in a bishopric. And I was an executive secretary for the bishopric. And in that capacity, I received a copy. Oops. Oh, that's a whole other one there. I received a copy of a book called... Nope, it's not that. Huh. Well, I didn't bring it, but it's called The Way of the Master by Mark E. Peterson. Every bishopric in the church got a copy of that year. Okay, and in that you'll find very prominent statements that salvation is in the church, it is through the church, it is by the church, and there's no salvation outside the church. Okay, just really plainly stated. So, at a quandary what to do, I spoke with my neighbor Alan about all this, and I won't reveal on this because it deserves his privacy to an extent, but he had found his own way to deal with the Mormon Church's falseness. Okay, and he could function as a high councilman in the stake. So he invited me. I told him I couldn't see it. If it's not true, I do not want to be here. I don't care how fun, how good, what position they call me. I do not want to be here. So he tells me, "Oh no, you can't. You don't want to throw it out like that." And right at that time, the building just to the west of Temple Square, they were developing. The church had hired 2 anthropologists, and they were developing a museum there. So he told me that, hey, we're getting together with the 2 anthropologists and Ron Walker of the church historians department, and we kind of getting together. Pardon?
Or that guy that was the archaeologist.
Yeah, I don't say his name. Oh. And so they were having meetings on Sunday evenings, just talking about stuff. Well, I can't remember my wife's condition. She didn't go. You just had Callie, but your mother and your sister were there. And they went with me up to that. Neither one of them, well, her mother was Mormon nominally. And her sister was not a Mormon. Her sister was a PhD candidate in anthropology, so she was interested in going. So we went up there to the meeting. And during the course of the meeting, it was explained, Ron Walker, church historian's office, he says that there are 9 different versions of the first vision, and the verdict is still out. The brethren haven't decided. Somebody asked that question. He said, well, the verdict is still out. The brethren haven't decided yet. Which one?
Which one what?
Which version?
That's correct.
That's right. Ron Walker said that. Now, this is what happened. Okay, and the time of this is probably 81 or 82.
No, Callie was born.
Oh, Callie's born, so it's 83 for sure. Okay, Callie's born in July. Yeah, 83. Okay, so then I'm walking to my missionary meeting, my stake missionary meeting, and Paul Hanks, who was the director of all the seminaries and institutes in Utah, he's walking down the hill. It was Capitol Hill where we lived. He's walking down the hill, and he meets me, and we're walking toward the stake center. We're talking, and I said, hey, by the way, what's the deal with the 9 different versions of the first vision? He goes, what? And I said, Yeah, Ron Walker told me. Ron Walker was in our stake, too. Bruce McConkie was in our stake. Gordon Hinckley was in our stake. L. Tom Perry, on and on. They lived in Zion Summit and up on the Ensign Downs there, various places. Anyway, so I asked Paul Hanks this question, and he says, well, that's not true. That's not true. And I says, yeah, actually, that is true. You know, I was there. And so we walked the rest of the way in silence. He gets back with me later that day and tells me, I talked to Ron, and that's a big mistake. He didn't say that. He didn't mean that. You know, big mistake. Didn't mean it. That is not what he said. I go, really? And so I thought, I must be nuts. You know, I thought I heard it. I must not have. So, fortunately, I had her mother and her sister, and I called them up and I said, hey, what do you remember hearing Ron Walker say about the first vision? Just, you know, if you heard anything, tell me. And they verified what I heard. So I'm not crazy. Cool. Unfortunately, what I have, you know, what you can boil down out of this is that this is the way that the hierarchy of the Mormon Church deals with problem truths. Okay? This is the standard way. Now, at the local level, you have a different thing at work. You have people who go along to get along. My wife and I can both tell you it was fun being LDS. We enjoyed it. We had no thought to leave. There was never, ever a thought to leave. As a matter of fact, it was kind of hard to leave.
What about Paul Hanks in the back?
Paul Hanks,
I mean, he's in the big
well, okay. We're at church. No, this has got to be, we're at church. And Paul Hanks comes up to me and he says, Randy, the stake president wanted me to ask you, President Martin wanted me to ask you, are you holding apostate meetings in your home? And I knew they were having trouble with, somebody was really pushing, some Mormon was really pushing the Jehovah Witness agenda. But no, I was having no meetings in my home. And this was very offensive to me, very offensive. And then he asked me one more question. Are you holding marriage encounters in your home? And I said, no marriage encounters. I didn't realize how irate I was because I was,
What are those?
Pardon?
What are marriage encounters?
Okay, all right. All right. My wife, even though we had all these small children, my wife worked in the primary, both the ward primary and the stake primary. And she had a good friend, Tanya Martin, I'll say her name, Tanya Martin. And Tanya had married a nice Catholic boy, Rick, okay? Tanya and Rick were a really nice couple, very nice, and had beautiful little children. And Mary says to me, it's such a heartbreak for Tanya because her husband's Catholic, and she just, couldn't you go baptize him? And I said, sure, no problem. So we went and we taught Rick the lessons. And Rick, he got it. He saw it. That makes sense. So he got baptized. Everybody's happy. Tanya's happy. And then it's time to start the course of going toward the temple, right? There's a course you take for the year before you go to the temple. So Rick gets to the fourth month, the fourth lesson, where they explain to him that he's going to be ordained to become a god. And all of a sudden, nobody can find Rick. So Rick Martin dropped out of sight. We lost total contact with him. He did not want to talk to any of us. So should I bring him in later or
No,
just tell about it now? Okay. A few years later.
No, but go to the
What?
marriage encounters, what you were going to
Oh, right. Okay, sorry about that. All right, it's your fault you asked a question. All right, well, the marriage encounter was because in our ward alone, one ward of the stake, we had, I think, close to
But
10
Tanya
divorces.
and Rick had done marriage encounter with the Catholic
That's
Church.
exactly right. What she said. Should I say it? Okay. Rick and Tanya had been to Marriage Encounter, which is open and available to anybody, but the Catholic Church specifically runs it. Okay. Now, it had strengthened their marriage, and it was obvious. Okay. They had a unity that survived this big earthquake in their life, Rick getting baptized and then dropping out of sight. A few years later, we get a Christmas card, and it's from Rick and Tanya. First time we've heard from them. And it says, Jesus is the reason for the season. And we thought,
No Mormon would say that.
do they know what we know? And this is after we had come out. And so we contacted them, and sure enough, Rick had gone to a crusade up at the University of Utah Stadium there, and it wasn't Billy Graham, but one of the people that he sends out, Lowell Lundstrom or something like that. Anyway, Rick had got saved, and he had gone home and told Tanya, who was working in the stake primary where they had moved to, and he had told her, honey, you just got to come hear this. I can't explain to you. You just got to come hear it. So she went back with him the next night, okay, patting him on the head, and she got saved. And she was so excited about it, she felt that she needed to go and tell all the primary workers in the stake because the children need this. And but the problem is, of course, that she learned real fast that that's just not going to happen. So anyway, then
But you're back at Paul Hanks now.
back at Paul Hanks. Paul Hanks, I admired as a man more godly than any man that I knew. I mean, truly a godly man. And I thought he was close. If anybody knew Jesus, he knows Jesus. So, after, now I don't remember exactly the sequence here, but these two things, it seems like it should be one way, but it might be the other.
All the authorities down there and asking them about that.
Adam God, yeah. Got the runaround. Okay, but after, this is how it happened. After Paul Hanks asked me if I was holding apostate meetings or marriage encounters in my home, I was very upset, and I simply decided to quit going to church, which was a really huge, huge thing for me. You can't even imagine. Whatever joy or pleasure any of you have ever had at sleeping in on a Sunday morning, okay, none of that ever occurred to me, okay? I was not that way. I was built religious as an addict. So I quit going because I was personally offended. Okay, that's I guess what it took. And the Mormons, of course, they make hay of that, oh yeah, people get offended, But it's the people, not the church. The church is perfect. And you heard that before? So I wasn't going to church, but yet I was still, in a position. And so the guy that had taken my place was a lawyer named Scott Jenkins, another really nice fellow. He comes and he says, the president of the stake has sent me, and Randy, is there anything we can do? I mean, what's the matter? I says, well, can you take a message to him for me? And he says, well, sure. And I says, tell them I think they're the biggest jerks I've ever met in this whole world. Now, I said this about people that I like, but I was really upset. I was mad. I don't know if he delivered the message. I can't picture it. He was too nice a fellow. But the result of that is Paul Hanks asked me to come up to his home one Saturday morning, which I did. And he says, okay, all right, what's this about? What's going on? What's the matter? And I says, well, I think I know how we can solve this problem. I was blindsided by this Adam God thing. And he says, oh, you mean the Adam God theory? And I says, theory? I says, no, I mean the Adam God doctrine. He says, no, it's just a theory. And I says, well, whatever, okay. Actually, that word wasn't invented back then, I don't think. But I just said, oh, okay. And I said, but I've got this plan, okay? And this plan is like this. We just let it all hang out. Anything about our history, it's out there. That way, the enemies cannot attack the church. Everybody will know, and it'll be okay. It will be wonderful. And he says, well, it's just a theory, that's... And so I brought out the Bruce McConkie letter. And this, for all purposes, for everything that you could know about this person as an associate, this godly man, in a heartbeat, said, well, the brethren feel that if we told the people, half of them would believe Brigham Young's crazy doctrine, and the other half would leave the church. That's not going to happen. That's what he told me. This is the director of all the seminaries and institutes in Utah at the time.
Now he's hiring.
Probably retired now.
No, he's hiring. He went higher in the church.
Oh, well, yeah. Oh, yeah, first quorum of 70s, I think, or maybe second quorum. In every situation, every other situation, nice people that you might want to live next door to. But there's this thing that's got a hold of them. There's this cancer that took, for those that were born in the church, took hold early on. And for those that embrace the church, there's something that they hear that's like the siren that calls them and they come in. My grandmother, 80-some years ago, brought her family into the Mormon church, her family line. And so as a result, we're talking of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people spread all over the United States that are LDS because of that.
Took us a long time to get out.
It did.
What got you?
Okay. There was a guy named Steve Hall. And do I have more time to tell this? Okay.
We're enjoying it.
Yeah, you guys have to leave, then leave, but go ahead.
Okay, all right. So this fellow named Steve Hall, he's with Ex-Mormons for Jesus. And somebody told him about me and that I was wondering and questioning. And he stopped by my house. And he came in, and my wife only describes it as seething. He was seething. The Mormons are deceivers, terrible, and going on like that. And she wanted me to throw him out right then. And I thought, well, everybody's got something to say, and if I listen, I'll hear the thing that he has to say.
Oh, wait. Now, just right before this, we knew the church wasn't true. Randy would go to work all day long, and then he had discovered a Calvary Chapel library up in Salt Lake. And he would take all of us. Well, do you want to tell that story? Because the cameras are on you.
Well, okay.
Just let it all out.
Yeah, let it all out. Okay. Well, there's a lot happened. That's the thing. God is reaching and searching after every single individual upon the face of the earth all the time. I'm convinced of it. I have just been associated with too many situations where somebody has passed away and you find out that, boom, boom, boom happened before that happened, and God was reaching to them right to the last of their life, even the worst, or the worst against God. Well, Calvary Chapel had a house on, I think it was 850 East, and I'm not sure what south, maybe 6 South or something like that. And in this house, they had a lending library, so they had a lot of tapes, and they had all kinds of original Mormon documents, original Book of Mormons and stuff. A lot of the Tanner stuff, and as well as some other things. Anyway, I would take my poor wife, who wanted to be a Mormon. She married me to be a Mormon. While this was going on, and I'm questioning the church, my wife is being told by my mother that if he leaves the church, you'll have to find another priesthood bearer that can take our grandchildren to the celestial kingdom. The bishop is counseling her that direction also. So anyway, I was still going to church when she's talking there, or went back to church, I guess is what it was, and I would drop her off and the children, take them to their meetings, see ya. And I didn't say I wasn't going to my priesthood meeting, but I didn't. I would go out the back door, head over to the other side of town, and start reading, start looking at stuff. And that's what I did. And then one day, I just knew that I was busted, two guys in white shirts and ties show up. And I thought, oh, well, this is it. And they said, hey, we heard that somebody was coming here every Sunday morning. And so they says, are you a Christian? I said, I'm a Mormon. And they said, well, could we pray with you? And I said, yeah, all right. And so we prayed. They prayed. And there was no, nothing happened. But I knew that something was different. Something was different. So I think the car was in the garage being repaired, and I took public transportation. So I'm on the bus, and this this guy, Steve Hall, is on the bus.
The same one that came to our house.
Same one that had come to the house, seething deceivers. Okay, and Steve was very downcast for some reason. I said, hey, what's going on? He said, you want something? I said, sure. And he throws a book across the aisle to me. And the book is called Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh McDowell. And I read that book like a novel, okay? And I went back to reading the New Testament, and I read this one scripture just jumped out at me, and it was that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And it was, he loved us first. And it was whosoever. And my heart melted, and I don't know, something happened to me. She describes it as I'm walking around a grocery store going, hey, you need $5? It's just all of a sudden said the little stream. And so the sad thing is when God calls us, we're supposed to respond, whatever the cost. And again, I guess because of a lack of integrity, whatever, I became an undercover Christian because I did not want my family to bust apart. And so I was joyful as quietly as I could be. And sometime during that period of time, Steve Hall comes back to visit our home. And I met him at the door, and I go, Steve, you can't be here. My wife will kill you. And so he says, oh, no, let me come in. I got something to tell you. Let me come in. She'll want to hear what I have to say. So he comes in. I'm thinking, oh, boy, this is going to be fireworks. And he says, I was wrong. I was deceived. The Mormon church is true. And he bears his testimony to us. And I'm just looking at him going, and I'm clicking through all the things that I have discovered about the Mormon church, and I'm just looking at him going, you're nuts. You're absolutely nuts. So what I found out about Steve is he had, out in Iowa where he was from, there was a girl, and he got baptized in the Mormon church for this girl. And then when he got out here, she dumped him, and he left the church for this girl. And our stake initiated a singles ward that year, and he had met somebody that was going there that said, hey, come on up here. And so he was back in for a girl. Poor Steve. But he gave me evidence that demands a verdict. And I read it like a novel, and I love that book. I've got several copies. I give them out to people. And what it did is it gave me a sense of the history that our Bible has. We dismissed it as Mormons so lightly as, translation after translation. But the history of that thing is just, it boggles the mind. The more you look at what God has done in that, it's just amazing.
But our marriage almost ended.
Oh yeah, that. Well, this is where she's going to become more vocal than ever because I, of course, won't remember it right. But basically, our marriage did become more rocky as time, because, like I say, she really did want to be a Mormon.
Well, let's just say
I told you.
we stopped going to church because I knew the church wasn't true, but I thought, well, there is no God then. And the Mormon, I still want to be a Mormon. I love the Mormon church. That's where I want to raise my kids. That's where I want to go. Since there's no God anyway, what difference does it make? But, so we stopped going to church just because people would come to our house, why aren't you going to church? We'd say, you don't want to know, because we didn't have Christ, we didn't have anything to share, but we didn't want to have them hurt like we were hurting. So we didn't want to tell them, but then they just beg. Tell us why, and we'd tell them, and I kid you not, they would put their hands on their ears and shake their head and said, stop it, I can't stand here anymore, and they would leave, and we would never, that was the end of long friendships. And, people would say to me that Randy has a hidden sin. There's something, he's either committing adultery or doing something. There's a reason why he's walked away from the church. And so, anyway, we stopped. Randy thought we should go to church, so we started going to churches, and we went to dead churches first. We didn't know anything about what was out there. And it was an awful, horrible experience for me. And so, of course, to me, coffee was a sin. And so if we went to church and I smelled coffee, it was like, whoa, these guys are sinners, and that's it. And so many, we had, this is the condition that we were by the time we totally left the church. And, we were...
I'd like to be in that condition again.
We were about to get divorced, really. It was bad. And Randy was, he was a Christian already, but so he tried to get us to, he finally found a good Christian church. He would take the kids, and I would stay home. And it was Southeast Christian Church, which was way far from our home. And there's a long story of how he got me to go there, and it would sound silly, so I won't tell you. But he got me to start going to a Bible study with some wonderful people, and then to this church. And Sundays were always the worst day, because I just would so struggle with going. Because as a convert, you see, he grew up in the church. But I was that convert that it talks about in Matthew that was twice the child of hell, And so I really had a hard time getting a relationship with the Lord after that. And I can remember one Sunday, I think the kids were this age, and we were going out to Southeast, and it was a crazy day. And we lost our dog that morning when we went anyway. And our oldest son there, Jack, he had super glued our oldest daughter's fingers together on the car ride out there. And anyway, and Randy and I were the Bickersons at that point in our life. And Randy had just read a book, and I'll let you tell them about your book. Because, our marriage was about over.
Well, interestingly, Jim Spencer had gone through this in his life, and as he went, he wrote a book called Beyond Mormonism. And a guy named Bruce Packer at the Southeast Christian Church handed that book to me. He says, man, you need to read this. And it really, what it boiled down to was that he says that on a particular drive, he called it the Sugar City Curve, God just really spoke to his heart that he had been trying to be his wife's God, Marguerite. Been trying to be her God, be her Holy Ghost. And God spoke to him and said, hey, she's mine. She belongs to me. You go be a Christian. You let me worry about Marguerite. That kind of thing. So Jim did, and happily ever after. As it goes with human beings. I looked at that and I thought, that would really mean trusting God, And I prayed to the Lord, and I just said, Lord, I know you don't want families to break up. You hate divorce, and I certainly don't want my family to break up. If I do this, if I make this step, I guess I'll see what your intention is. And so this particular Sunday morning she's talking about, the dog had run away. The youngest one's bicycle had been stolen out of the driveway during the night. Nobody was speaking to each other. on the way, really. And my wife was only going for one reason, and that was we had a goat in the city and had gotten rid of it out to the equestrian park to be a horse's companion. And I promised her we'd go visit the goat after church. So that's why she went. So anyway, we get there, and she made every indication that she was not going in to the church. And so I thought, well, that's actually good, considering what I'm about to do, which was to make a public profession of faith in Jesus Christ. Okay, so got in there at the appropriate time. I went forward. Jerry Lewis was the pastor.
Josh went with you.
Yep, Josh went up with me, my youngest,
Son.
and the son. That's right. And we got baptized right then also. And my wife was in the cry room with the little girl. And she was crying because she was saying in her heart, that's it. It's over now. It's done. You know, she's not going to put up with this. So whether she had determined in her heart to leave me at that point or what, I'm not sure. But things kind of moved right along, and that was that she decided to come back to New York and respond to some family issues, and took the two little girls, and me and those three boys are there. Back in those days, you could stand out on the tarmac while the plane left, and we're just thinking that's it, you know, or I'm thinking that's it. I don't know what the boys were thinking, but I was thinking that's it. That is it. And my wife later told me that when she sat down on the plane, looked out at us, she said it just came over her. Look, your husband's trying to do what's right. You need to follow him. And so she determined that she was coming back, but she didn't let me in on that little secret. So I really got pretty depressed, thinking that it was done. But while she was gone, a Mormon was moved out of the neighborhood, I think by God, and a Christian family was moved in around the corner. And our littlest one there, Lindsay, she is the one that initiated contact with that family. She went over there, and she didn't have any shoes on it. It was wintertime like
No,
this.
it was fall.
Was the fall? I thought there was
I
snow.
was homeschooling.
Oh, okay. This is the first contact. So, anyway, the lady, Shelley, was very nice and brought Lindsay home and told her very specifically, you know, you are welcome to come to our house, but you got to have shoes on. And so Lindsay took that to heart, and I think then.
Well, okay. So
This is
the first
just
time
cute.
she brought her to the door, knocked, and there was Lindsay, and she says, "Oh, I love your little daughter, but she came with no shoes on," and blah blah blah. So anyway, I was homeschooling Callie again, and Lindsay and Callie were opposite. Like Callie was very quiet and always did exactly what you wanted. She never wanted to make you unhappy. Where Lindsay was into everything, and she figured out how to do everything. And so she figured out how to open the door, and she was probably pretty 4-ish, maybe a little.
Lindsay? No, Lindsay was like
3,
2.5 or 3.
2.5. Oh, I hate to think
Wait,
I let her out.
85.
Anyway, she got out the door
3.
a second time and went over to Shelley's house, and Shelley, when she brought her back, knocked on my door, she said, well, she was a homeschool mom too. And she said, I heard this knock on the door, and I went, and she said, Lindsay had this coat on, and she opened it up, and she says,
Yeah.
she says, I got my shoes on. And she was totally naked.
Anyway, that bonded the families together, and
And so she was going to BSF, Bible Study Fellowship, in Salt Lake, and she invited me to go. And that's where, God did. I really thought that if there was a God, he is sterile and doesn't have anything to do with his hair. And as we studied Matthew, it was just for me, and God was communicating personally with me. And when we got to about the Pharisees, I had been so bitter that God had allowed me to become a Mormon, the burning in my bosom and all that kind of stuff. And I remember one of the missionaries that came was, teaching us. I said, how do you know for sure that, the prophet's not going to lead you astray? And that missionary said, God would destroy him before he would let him lead you astray. And I had a Catholic friend that came, and of course he went through all the thing about how the Catholic Church, was so false and had changed their doctrine so much over the years, and that God had restored the gospel the way it was supposed to be. All the things that were back then, were, and now I'm finding out, what? Nothing's the same. I mean, our temple garments, and the temple ceremony changing over and over. And I'm thinking, if God restored it, why isn't it just restored? And that's it. I mean, the Catholics don't have anything on the Mormons as far as changing doctrine. And, it was devastating to me. And I was so bitter. But then as we got into Matthew and reading about the Pharisees, and I thought, there was Christ right in their midst. And here were these Pharisees who thought they were so righteous through their own works that they couldn't see Jesus. They couldn't respond to him because they were bound up in what they were doing for their own salvation. And for the first time, I praise God that how much that scripture meant to me, because I knew that I had been a Pharisee as a Mormon. Because my husband and I, we did everything, every meeting, every calling. We proudly wore our garments. We went to the temple, did our genealogy work. We did. I'm sure we didn't drink Coca-Cola because it had caffeine. We were letter of the law. And God just convicted me of my own sin. And you see, as a Mormon, I was so bound up in what I was doing. I thought I was good. And so much, I looked at other people so judgmentally. I remember people at the temples, handing out pamphlets, and I used to go up to them and say, why aren't you doing, why do you pick on us? We're good people, why aren't you out there, fighting against ugly things and, people that are doing bad things? And I was just always so offended at it. And you see, God had to rip my family away from me. Our children really suffered it. See, it took us a long time to leave the church, over 2 years. And during that time, our boys, the girls, they never knew what was happening, but the boys, it was traumatic for them. And I can remember going into the Christian church after, Randy had become one and I was kind of in between, and our boys walked over to the coffee and they picked it up and looked right at me like, and they drank it. We're drinking sin, Mom, But because of those things were taboo, those boys, the first two, had some issues that way. Because, it just showed me how you can't legislate morality. You can't, legalism kills the spirit, always. And so, anyway, through that Bible study, I was convicted of my own sin.